Hello and welcome to this month's Tullie Textiles. So for our June 2024 session, I thought we'd have a go at making some embroidered buttons. So we're going to be using self-cover buttons, which you can get online or in haberdashery stores, or you might even have some lying around. We're going to be doing a bit of embroidery, a little bit of sewing, and making ourselves some very beautiful, unique custom buttons. It's a lovely simple technique. Once you get the hang of it, there's all sorts of different things you can do with it, and hopefully it will be a nice relaxing thing for you to try. For those of you new to Tullie Textiles, it's a monthly session that runs normally on the second Sunday of the month and is run by myself. I'm Helen from Delicate Stitches, and in the morning I release a video showing you what we're doing, and in the afternoon we have a Zoom session. In the Zoom session, we'll be doing much the same thing, but obviously it's a bit more interactive because we're in the Zoom group and you'll have a chance to chat to other members, have a chat with me, and also to see an object from Tullie House's collection. We'll have a little discussion about that as well. If you fancy joining that, then the details are on my Facebook page and you can find the links from there, or you can drop me a message and I'll try and get back to you. But for now, let's get on with our covered buttons. Let's start by having a little look at what we're going to need to make our embroidered covered buttons. So first thing we're going to need is a bit of fabric to cover our buttons with, something fairly lightweight. We've got to get this over the former, so you don't want anything too heavy. It will depend on what kind of button you've got, which I'll come to in a second, but generally kind of a quilting cotton or something like that is a good weight to go for. Try and avoid anything too heavy. You're also going to need your cover buttons. So I've got a couple of different types here. I've got these plastic ones, which you can see are made of two parts. So you've got kind of the main part of the button and then the little case that goes over the top. And if I show you one that's made up, there we go, you can see that this bit fits over into the back of the main bit. So it's quite a simple process. You can also get metal versions of these, which are a little bit sturdier. So you can see I've got some nice vintage ones here. And again, it's the same kind of thing. There's the metal bit and the bit that goes on the back. The metal ones are better if you've got a heavier fabric, because they've got little teeth which help it grip, and obviously being metal, they're a little bit tougher. These ones I just wanted to show you just because I really like the packaging of these. They're obviously fairly old ones, but you can get modern versions as well. And they do come in different sizes. So these are 22mm ones, so that's just over 2 centimetres. And you can get really, really teeny tiny ones. So these Co-op ones from I don't know when, but they were 35p, are just 7mm. So they're really tiny. So they work in the same way, but they do come in different sizes. For embroidered ones, you want a reasonable size one, so I'd go for around about 20mm, something like that, around about 2 centimetres. So we've got our cover buttons, we've got fabric, we're going to need some embroidery thread for doing our embroidery, an embroidery needle. We're also going to need just some normal sewing thread and a needle for that, and a pair of scissors is always useful. If you can't get hold of the self-cover buttons for any reason, you can actually do this over a normal button. If you're going to do that, just make sure that it's something quite sturdy, and fairly plain works best. But you can do this over a normal button as well. But I'm going to be demonstrating with the cover buttons. Right, let's get stitching. So our first job is to get our fabric ready. And if you have a look on the back of your cover button packet, you'll probably find it's got a template, or at least directions of how big you should cut your fabric for the size button you're using. Because obviously we need enough fabric to cover the button and to tuck in, but we don't want too much. So most of them come with a guide. So you can see I've cut this off a previous pattern, and you can see the 22mm there, which is the size button that I'm using. So cut yourself a template if there isn't one on there, and if I just show you, you kind of want about just over 1 centimetre round the edge. So the circumference of your button plus about 1 centimetre round the edge if you haven't got a guide to cut out. And then it is as simple as just cutting round. You might find it easier to draw and cut first. I'm just going to cut round this one whilst holding it in place because it's quite a firm fabric. It's not going to move around too much. But obviously, if it's easier, draw round first. And it doesn't really matter what you use to draw around because the edge of the fabric is going to be hidden inside the button once it's made up. There we go. So I've got my fabric ready. I'm ready to begin stitching. And what I want to show you is a lazy daisy stitch to make a little flower. So what we're going to be making, if I can just find my example one, there we go. What we're going to be making is a little stitched flower that will go on to our button. So I've already threaded up with blue, so I'm going to stick with the blue, make a companion to this one. And lazy daisy stitch is basically a collection of detached chain stitches. So it's individual chain stitches worked around a central point to make a flower. So we're going to start in the centre of the fabric. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a loop. So like if we were making a chain, we're making the first link in the chain. Then the needle goes in next to, but not in exactly the same spot, next to where the thread's coming out. And we take a small stitch, the length we want our petal to be, and we make sure that the thread is tucked behind the needle. So this is going to make our first chain, or in this case petal, like so. And depending on how tightly you pull it will depend on the shape of petal you get. So if you pull it very tightly, you'll get more of a pointy petal. If you leave it a bit looser, then you'll get more of a rounded petal. And it's up to you what you do. Either is fine. To finish the stitch, remember we had the thread tucked behind the needle, we just make a small stitch over that thread. So to make sure that it's held in place, we're taking a small stitch over that thread. And that's our first detached chain, or the first petal of our lazy daisy. So then we're going to come back into the centre and we're going to make another petal. So when you're working like this, do make sure not to pull your threads too tight because your fabric will all gather up. So just keep an eye on your tension. So we're going to make a loop, our petal. We're going to go into the fabric next to where we came out. Take a small stitch, the length of the petal, and obviously want to be about the same as the previous one. Make sure that the thread is tucked behind the needle, like that. And then pull it through. Again, paying attention to how tight we're pulling to make our petal the shape we want. Little holding stitch over the edge of that thread. And that's our second petal made. So we go back to the centre. We make a small loop. Go back into the fabric next to where we came out. Take a small stitch, the length we want our petal to be. Make sure that our thread is tucked behind the needle. Pull it through. Little stitch to hold it in place. And you can see we're starting to get a nice flower shape now. So let's see if I've got enough thread to make the rest of this. So we're making our loop into the fabric next to where we came out. Make a stitch we want the length of the petal to be. Make sure that the thread is tucked behind the needle. Small stitch to anchor. And I reckon I've got just enough thread for one more petal. So back to the centre. Being careful not to pull things too tightly. Back into the fabric next to where we came out. Stitch the length we want the petal to be. Make sure that our thread is tucked behind the needle. Gently pull it through. Small stitch to anchor it. And there is our little daisy. And don't worry if you've got one that's kind of a bit more characterful than the others. These are based on natural forms. They're all going to be a little bit different. On the back, I'm just going to make a small knot just to secure it, because obviously when I'm using these buttons I don't want my stitching to come undone. There we go. So I'm just making a little knot and I'll trim the ends, and it doesn't matter what the back looks like because nobody's going to see that. Now for a bit more contrast, I'm going to add a little bit of yellow in the centre. You can do a French knot, or you can do a little stitch, or you could even add a little bead if you wanted to, whatever you fancy. So again, just a knot in the back to secure. I'm going to come up in the centre and I'm going to do a type of knot. So I'm going to make a loop round my finger. I'm going to pop the needle into the loop and into the fabric next to where I came out. Tighten the loop round the needle. There we go, and that's a nice little centre for my flower. Once again, I'm just going to secure that on the back. Just popping a little knot in there. Trim that end. And there we go, I've got my little flower. So what I'm ready to do now is to make my button. So now I need to switch to the sewing cotton, and I've got a finer needle threaded up with that already. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a line of little running stitches around the edge, a little row of gathering stitches. So my first one I'm going to secure with a little back stitch because I want a point to pull against. That didn't work terribly well. Let's try that again. There we go. So you can see that's nice and secure. So now I am going to go round the edge, making little running stitches, and I'm pretty close to the edge. These stitches are going to be hidden inside the button. And you might find with certain fabrics you can skip this step. However, as a general rule, I find it's a lot easier to do this. It does make it easier to gather the fabric up evenly. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep my stitches fairly small and fairly even, again, so that that gathering is nice and even. If you do kind of 3 or 4 massive stitches, you'll get round faster, but when you come to pull them up, it won't gather evenly. So we'll just carry on round like that. Almost there. There we go. So now I'm back where I started. So what I'm going to do is grab the 2 pieces of my button, and then making sure that my flower's facing the right way up, I'm going to centre my flower over the button, and what should happen is when I pull this, it's going to gather nicely. Can you see that there? It's gathering around the button. And if I just flip that over, I've got my lovely embroidery on the front and gathers here. So what I'm going to do is just pull this gathering nice and tight, making sure that you're not obscuring this post, because this is going to be how you attach your button to whatever you use it for. But pull those gathering stitches nice and tight. I'm going to do just a little stitch to secure those gathering stitches. And it doesn't matter, these aren't going to be seen, this is just to make your life easier. Because I've done the gathering stitches, it's come round on here nice and even. If you find you've got any lumps like that, you can just gently tease them out with your fingers so that everything's lying as you want it to. Snip your gathering thread, and then this bit just fits on top. So you can see it's got kind of little toothy bits. They face downwards, they're going to grab onto the fabric. And often the way you can tell is they often have writing on. So if the writing is the wrong way round, you've got it upside down. So make sure that you can read whatever the writing is on there. And then basically it just fits over and it should just click into place. Now that can take a little bit of pressure. It can take a little bit of force to get that in. But you should find that once it's in, you can't get it out again. So make sure you've got everything in the right place. And there we go. There we've got our buttons. And then you can just keep going until you've got a set. You could mix up your colours, you can do different patterns. I've got a little heart one there. You can do it with funky fabric and make use of the pattern that's on the fabric. If you get really into making buttons, you can bead. So I've got some beaded examples here. There we go. So there's all sorts of things you can do with this basic technique. As always, I like to show you something to get you going, but then what you do with it is entirely up to you. As I mentioned at the start, you can also make these over just normal buttons. So you do the same thing, gather it up, but rather than put the cover button in the middle, you put your normal button in, and then just make a little patch to cover the gathering stitches. And I just made a little sewn picot loop so that I can sew it on. But that one's just got a normal button on the inside. It's just got a button, that kind of thing inside. So have fun, have a go. Let me know how you get on. And as always, if anyone's got any comments or suggestions for future activities, do let me know. But until next time, happy stitching.